So let's take it back. Let's bring it back to Japan. From your perspective, what you've seen, experienced, what's the most common form of racism in Japan?
I can go. I feel like, I don't know, the thing that comes up for me is just like white aspiration. I feel like there's just white aspiration in Japan. And I mean, just so many memories are popping up for me right now, just in this conversation. Like I remember growing up, like my mom buying, or she didn't like buy it for me and bring it home. Like I went to the store and I wanted one of like these like nose pinchers to make my nose smaller, or I wanted to get, like every summer I would go to Japan and get my hair chemically straightened, and it's just, I see a lot of things in that context as like a young girl, and the things I aspire to look like. I wanted to look like my mom, right? And she was my closest proximity to whiteness. She's a very, very fair-skinned Japanese woman, and so I just think that the whole country doesn't understand that it's been brainwashed to have white aspiration, and therefore that trickles down into this whole dialogue of just colorism, because there are like darker skinned Japanese people, like my great grandmother was, and she hated she was dark skinned. And, she hated when my mother married my father, who was Black, because she was like, I don't want any, brown Black babies in the family. And when we were born, we were so pale, and she was shocked, and it's just, I feel like it's riddled with racism, and it's something that it's unable to like really fully face, because I think America takes the lead on that conversation. And so all these other kind of countries get a pass on it for some reason. But no, it's completely riddled with it, even though it's, I'm forgetting the word, but yeah, it's riddled with it, I think.
I think you have a comment there, Rino.
Yeah, I really agree with that, because there's a lot of terms that applies to that. For example, like there's a term like bihaku, is like beautiful white skin, and we try to like white our skin so much. Also there's a word hafu gao, is like the hafu means like mixed race, Japanese, but the hafu, it's only the meaning of the hafu really comes from like white in Japanese. So yeah, we have an aspiration that we want to become hafu, like half mixed white, but not other hafu. It also applies to that. And yeah, in other terms, we feel that inferiority compared to Western like people or white people in the States. So yeah, my grandma also tell me that don't get married to like darker skinned people, and that's really like racist, but it's really embedded in our like tradition or culture or whatever. But in our like generation, like younger generation, it's kind of try to like overcome those racist ideologies. So it's like getting better compared to our grandmothers or like the post-war era. But yeah, the white aspiration also embedded in the society a lot in terms of like beauty standard as well, but in other categories.
Do you find it particularly difficult to kind of, I don't know, feel comfortable in your own skin because of that? Like, what is that like for you, particularly, personally,
In Japan?
Yeah, in Japan, because there is like an aspiration. There is that kind of distinct, hey, you should be this way. How does that affect you? I'm just a little curious, because these type of conversations you don't really get to have. So
I don't really feel uncomfortable, because I always ignore that, like if you wonder. I don't really care about it, but I really care about how my friends feel about it, because I have a lot of mixed race friends, but not mixed white, like China or Korea or whatever, non-white countries or race. So they really like reflect themselves that they are inferior compared to white mixed and Hafu people. So that makes me really uncomfortable. And yeah, that not my like, I don't really feel uncomfortable with that, but like observing my friends affecting from those terms is really like I don't really feel.
Yeah.
I think it should be kind of brought up that it's not necessarily, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, that in general, not in general, but sometimes the what's the word I'm trying to say, the disinterest in dark skin in Japan and other Asian countries has also been around before Black people were introduced to the country. I mean, you go back to, old beauty standards, even geisha and things, when it was like a white skin was always, this ideal type of beauty. So I just want to make it kind of clear that it might not necessarily be anti-Black. You know what I mean? It might not, it could be whatever brought up that beauty standard. I mean, you look at the old stuff from China and Korea, and like they share in Eastern Europe, Eastern Asia, this white skin type of ideal. However, what Rino was talking about with your mother or your grandmother, and not wanting you to get married to darker skinned people, or I'm sure those conversations are also happening. Like, okay, well, don't get married to Black people because your skin's going to be darker, that thing. So
yeah, that makes sense, but it does affect people of I just we're talking about systematic racism in America, these type of kind of beauty standards. I mean, generally you can pretty much see that anywhere in any country, right? You see India where there's skin lightening products which are really high selling. Either way, no matter where it came from, it still affects people of darker skin negatively. And actually, I'll bring this up, but one of the reasons why my mom decided to move us from America was when it was before my brother was born. I have an older brother. When I was 2, or actually no, right when I was born, 1 or 2, someone called both of us dirty babies. Like, and my mom talked about this multiple times to me. She was like, that was the trigger for me to like, hey, these kids need to grow up in America at the very least, where they can won't have to deal with that kind of experience, right? So obviously, yeah, I think things are changing, but at the end of the day, the systems that are created within Japanese society doesn't gear itself to support, or kind of puts people of darker complexion, not necessarily Black, people of darker complexion definitely at a disadvantage in terms of beauty standard, and who they think is beautiful, cool, who's considered scary. It's funny because like I remember when I was a professional athlete, my teammate and I he's African American, I'm half, so we're both pretty dark, obviously, but we were always called scary, and I always thought just because we had the muscles and stuff like that. But then when another guy, taller, blonde hair, blue eyes, who's bigger than me, he was cool, not scary. So and these were kids who were saying this. It was a very natural reaction, right? So I always wondered, like what makes us scary? What makes him cool? Like, they don't know the positions we play. They don't know, the only thing that can really judge, because no one knows anything about football at that time. They just saw us and they're like, well, why are these two guys we're smaller, we're scary, but like, why is this guy cool? So I'm not saying there was anything particularly bad in that situation. I was just like, well, why is that the situation? How are people making these decisions, like these very natural decisions based off how we look alone, so it's just, it can affect people based on how they, it affects people even at a younger age, obviously, because these were kids. They were like 10 years old. So, yeah.
I think that speaks to Bessie's point about white aspiration and that view of, however that manifests itself. Like, looking at, like you said, this guy, this white guy with the muscles, he was bigger than you guys, but like he was cool instead of scary. So it's seen as a more positive type of thing. So is that the most common in Japan? Most common form of racism, you think, in Japan? Are there any others that you can think of?
In Japan.
For mixed race Japanese, I think microaggression is like really common for them because they will, like, for example, like, nice to meet you, my name is blah 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 blah, and they try to introduce themselves. But first of all, like, they will be told that where are you from, or like, oh, you're mixed Japanese and like from other countries, so where are your parents from and where they met, why do they get married, and like all those like private and like personal questions will be asked to them, but not to me because I'm like, I look Japanese and my parents are Japanese. So like, they're not trying to be racist or try to exclude them, but they're just really curious maybe. But that's really, for me, it's like rude because it indirectly telling them that you're not like normal Japanese, you're like abnormal, and they have to like answer to those questions like every time. Like that is really like not racist, but we try to acknowledge that is microaggression, and that also leads to racial prejudice or like racism in a broader picture. So yeah, microaggression is everywhere. I encounter every time observing those things.
And you smiled when she said that, Gino, like it's been something that you experienced as well.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I mean, that's basically, she pretty much just talked about my life every day. Any meeting, anything that I do, I pretty much have to give a whole like background of like why I speak Japanese, why I look the way I look, or just why. I have to give a pretty long speech. I've already written it down to a point where I memorized it. I'm like, oh well, I think I did it in the beginning. I was like, was born in Japan, grew up in America, mom's Japanese, I'm half, blah blah blah, and then they're like, well, why are you here? Like, like, why do I have to explain why I'm here if I was born here? So it's the general idea or assumption that you have to explain why you're alive, essentially, is just very tiresome to everybody. And again, like said, so it's not like a situation where they're trying to be rude. I think a lot of times they are just generally curious. But on a personal level, it's just like, well, why do I have to continue explaining this to every new person that I meet? So I completely understand and feel what you were saying.
On that point, a lot of people bring that up, and we're going to kind of get to a question that's going to kind of speak to that a little bit, as far as people just saying, oh, well, they're just curious, with it being, present modern day and globalism and mixed race and intercultural people are everywhere. For people to still be that kind of curious, is that okay? Right? Like, at some point you have to say, why is this still a surprise to you? And there's a point there. So we're going to kind of get to that later in a question, but I think that's a good point to be brought up. So what are some forms of microaggressions that you've experienced or witnessed in Japan?
They were asking me like, hey, can I have your foreigner card? I'm like, I don't have my foreigner card. They're like, why don't you have your foreigner card? I was like, because I'm Japanese. And I was like, here's my passport.